Welcome, Greek U Nations, episode number 426 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book came out at Christmas time. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, I love talking about disability services on this show because there are so many that potentially could impact a college student today. Things like ADHD, blindness, brain injuries, deaf, learning disabilities, medical disabilities, physical disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, even speech and language disabilities. So, as we have this conversation today on the podcast, I want you to think about your particular student organization and whether it's truly accessible on your campus to these students if they are interested in joining your organization. All right, let's get on to our guest. Dr. John McAllister is a productive and recognized higher education scholar with professional experience in graduate education, blindness and visual impairments, graduate education program coordination, student affairs, academic program administration, and yes, disability services management. Dr. McAllister maintains an active research agenda that examines race, gender, and disabilities in American higher education, diversity issues in college access and achievement, the effects of education policies and campus environments on racial and ethnic minority student outcomes, as well as access to programs and accommodations for students who have disabilities. He also participates in multiple higher education and blind and visually impaired professional associations via committees and certification and continuing education programs. Welcome to the show, Dr. McAllister.
Good morning. How is everyone?
And
How
we're
are you?
doing great. We are doing great. I love that you're wearing your Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated shirt today for Frat Friday. I absolutely love it. You are ready for the show.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your upbringing because I think this is really interesting because when you were a kid, you were originally living in the black neighborhood of Kinloch, and then your father ended up moving the family into this white neighborhood in Ferguson, Missouri, but you were only the third black family in that particular neighborhood. So I want you to talk to our audience about that adjustment when you moved into Ferguson, Missouri, and how did that prepare you for your career ahead?
Oh, so it was when I think back on the move, it was a time when I moved there in 1976. So that was approximately 3 to 4 years after blacks were allowed to move into white areas due to the Fair Housing Act being passed.
Mhm.
And so when I came there, it was a culture shock. I came from a homogeneous black neighborhood, which is the only black owned and operated city in Missouri, in St. Louis, and so that's called Kinloch, Missouri. And so when I moved to Ferguson, it was like being a fish out of water, basically. So I moved there in 1976 at 5 years old, about to turn 6. And at that age, my mother had to talk to me about race. So you can imagine having to sit down and attempt to educate a child, a 5-year-old, about race. Currently have an 8-year-old, and to speak to her about race and to have her to understand race is something that is unimaginable. But it was something that she had to discuss with me because there were individuals who didn't want us in the neighborhood. And, I kind of experienced racism um, from an early age, and it was quite devastating. Um, uh, but my mother and my grandmother, they made sure that I was safe and I felt safe and I was able to express myself as it pertains to being treated differently.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine having that conversation, with a child at 5 years old. I mean, that's a hard enough conversation with a teenager, let
Right.
alone somebody who's five. And to basically say, hey, you're going to potentially experience some racism here in Ferguson, as a 5-year old. I mean, that's hard for me to get my arms around, that conversation and how that goes and what that impact would have on the rest of your career, that conversation, really. And the other really interesting thing about you is that you started working at the Arkansas School for the Blind as an orientation and mobility specialist. What did you learn in this position? And talk to our audience about why this has become really a lifelong passion for you in terms of working with the blind.
So, working with individuals with disabilities in general is a passion for me, because at an early age, my mother and my grandmother, they made sure that I understood that people, no matter what their challenges were, they were still human beings. And so when I started working at the Arkansas School for the Blind, I transitioned from working with individuals with mental disabilities to physical disabilities, basically. So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Philander Smith University, which is a historically Black college here in Arkansas in Little Rock. And then I went over to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and I got a master's degree in rehabilitation of the blind with an emphasis in orientation and mobility. Now, you asked, what did I learn? Well, so one thing I learned is that there is a difference between vision and sight. So sight is what we actually see. A vision, to have vision really doesn't require sight. It requires you to have the wherewithal to understand that the world operates, and you have to operate within the world to make it better. So a blind man can have vision, basically,
Mm,
because uh, in the field of blindness, blind people don't see race, they don't see color, they see character. And so your character will carry you long further than your color ever will. So if you have good character, um, uh, it'll take you places and open doors that will never close for you. And it don't matter what your race is. And so I learned that at working with the blind and visually impaired, you don't have to have sight to have vision.
Wow, that's a powerful lesson, I think, in terms of character and the importance of that. Especially as later we'll talk a little bit more about fraternity and sorority life and some of the values that we commit to. But you're absolutely right. I think if you have good character, people will seek you out. People will want to work with you no matter what. And that stays with you for a lifetime. And then hopefully that impression of what you just said really falls on our listeners, and they really take that to heart. You received your master's in college student affairs from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Then you went on to get your doctorate from the University of Arkansas in higher education administration. You know, I'm right now in a doctorate program in assessment, learning, and student success at Middle Tennessee State University.
Okay.
And one of the main questions that we tackle really from day one is talking about student success. So, what is your definition of student success? And talk to us about how today's fraternities and sororities help contribute to student success.
So my definition of student success. So I think it's twofold. First of all, as a student, to be successful in higher education, you have to have some time management, and you have to be able to manage time. And what I consider student success is a student who comes into a university setting or a college setting, and they don't too much know about how to manage time. And then over a period of time, they get the time management skills along with the study skills, which translates into them being successful students who are making appropriate grades to matriculate.
Mhm,
That's
mhm,
one.
mhm,
Another part of student success is, to me, by me working in student affairs before, is the student successfully integrates into the college campus and college environment. Because if they don't, then they will not be successful in the other things. So the first thing is the student has to come in and integrate into the society or um, to the college environment so that they seek out opportunities to be successful, and they learn how to be successful. And I think it's really important. I know when I was at Philander Smith College coming in as a freshman, we had peer tutors, and those peer tutors, peer models, or role models, they taught us how to go do registration, how to kind of, if you were having a problem, go how to speak with your professor in the right manner. And so I think that student success is twofold. It's one with grades, and two with integrating into the college environment.
Mhm. Makes total sense. So how do fraternities and sororities help with that? How does Omega Psi help with that?
Interesting. That's a good lead-in. That's a good follow-up question. So
Mhm.
became an Omega in 1990. So I was a second semester freshman. So when you become a part of a organization or fraternity or sorority, you automatically have this network of friends um, who will kind of mentor you into becoming successful most oftentimes. It also, when especially in a Black fraternity or sorority, you become a part of the fabric of a campus, and so you're automatically kind of um, welcomed into the community, and so that gives you some connection to the campus, which is important for you to be able to want to come back and finish or sustain and finish.
Mhm.
And so and you have to, particularly in Omega Psi Phi, you have to maintain a 2.5 GPA to stay active on campus. In my chapter in particular, um, most of all of us graduated. We have like a 90% graduation rate, 80% graduation rate. So we didn't, in my chapter, it wasn't enough to just become an Omega and become a Q dog, so to
Mhm.
speak. The big man on campus, you had to graduate. There was something that that was pushed on us. You know, it's not only do you have to become an Omega, but you have to graduate.
Hmm. I love that. And, I really push back on a lot of college fraternity men, sorority women to really understand the numbers. What is the graduation rate for fraternity and sorority members on your campus? What is the retention rate? See, now you start talking about the language of higher education. And
Right.
if you can show the retention rate is significantly higher than unaffiliated students, now we're talking. Now we're starting to cook. And that's really what I want, the students to be familiar with on their campus, because that is really now in alignment with the goals of the institution. And now we can do something with that in terms of investing in the fraternity and sorority community, et cetera. I'm just curious too, because I'm sure at an HBCU, you had a lot of choices in terms of organizations that you could have joined.
Right.
There were other, fraternities there in the Divine Nine, and even at PWIs. I mean, there's plenty of other organizations to choose as well. So why did you choose Omega Psi Phi over the other organizations on campus?
It's funny that you said that. When I came to campus, a lot of times people find identities in fraternities and sororities, right? I
Mhm.
already had an identity when I came to campus. I was just, it's naturally myself. I always owned my space. Whatever space I occupied, I owned it. And so I actually, every fraternity called me and said, "Hey man, you need to come over to the to the smoker or to the information session." And I was like, nah, no, I don't think so. A lot of my friends, and one of my mentors, he was a member of KA Psi, and so he was also from St. Louis. So mostly everybody that was at my school from St. Louis was Kappas, right? So and
Right.
then they came, and I was like, nah. Sigmas came. I was like, nah. The Alphas came. I was nah. The only one that didn't call me was Omega, and that's the
Wow.
one I sought out for myself because they didn't call me. They weren't they weren't so inviting, you know what I mean? They weren't saying, "Oh, you need to come over here." They, just kind of number one, they fit my personality. I'm just a laid back type of guy. I like to be myself. I don't want to have to live up to a stereotype. This is not who I am as an individual.
Right.
So I like to be myself. It gave me some individuality. I knew I could be myself. I didn't have to live up to a stereotype. And I liked the brotherhood of Omega Psi Phi.
That is interesting. That's fascinating that everybody called you except Omega, and somehow you're like, all right, now I'm gonna go after you because you didn't call me.
Well, just like it's sort of like having a girl. All the girls tell you yeah, and then one of them tell you no. That's the one you chase.
That's the one you chose, the one that said no to you. It's a challenge, right? That is hilarious. That is absolutely hilarious. And all those organizations are amazing. I mean, I know I
Yes,
can't
they
say
are.
enough good
They
things.
all are amazing.
I have great friends in all of those organizations that you listed, and I will tell you they are amazing, incredible people. So for you to say no to all of them and go out for the one that didn't talk to you is amazing to me. But okay, all right, listen, I mean, it obviously worked out.
So,
So
so
that's good.
it's sort of like my personality is I like a challenge.
Yeah.
So I told my wife, my wife was a Marine. I told my wife if I was ever in the armed services, they'd be a Marine. That's the toughest one to get into. I don't want to get into the other stuff. I want to get into the toughest one.
The toughest.
So I like a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that about your personality. So that makes sense now that I think about it. The other issue is that alcohol abuse and hazing really continues to be a problem on college campuses all across the country. You know that fraternities and sororities, we believe in scholarship, we believe in service, we believe in brotherhood, yet all of these stereotypes and all the negative behaviors prevent students from joining our fraternities and sororities to the point where the parents are basically like, nah, you can't join because I've heard all these terrible things in the news. So, how do we flip the script and now change the narrative within fraternity and sorority life to actually be in alignment with the values that you and I committed to when we joined at the altar?
So I believe that all fraternities, whether it's white or black, they have this misconception on what it means to be in the fraternity or sorority, number one, especially from the person who on the outside looking in, like a parent. Let me go back some. I pledged Omega in 1990. So I was the last line of Omega Psi Phi fraternity in the history to ever pledge like they pledged in the old days. On top, I had a lamp. I wore Lampados stuff. I had a brick. I had a real lamp. I had a lamp on my neck, and we could actually pledge on top outside. And so a lot of people are trying to be purveyors of heritage and keep things alive that should not be kept alive due to over time, mostly every fraternity or sorority has been sued for hazing,
Mhm.
whether it's alcohol or physical. And so it is important as individuals that we understand that these fraternities and sororities have insurance policies. And every time a student is hazed or the fraternity is found to have committed hazing, that policy is hit, number one. Number two, that policy raises on the fraternity or sorority. Number two, and in the public eye, you give your fraternity or sorority a black eye. So, as an individual who understands the business of a fraternity now, at first I understood only the membership part of it, right? Because I was 18 years old, I was enjoying the fraternity. But as I matriculated into a man, I understand the business side of it, and I have children, so I understand the parent side of it. And I just know that some things were not meant to continue as they are. And one thing is the hazing. It's not meant to continue as it is. I would hate for a young person to lose their life trying to become uh, trying to become a member of any organization. as fraternity or sorority.
Hmm.
So it is important that we kind of change the change the narrative. And the only way you change the narrative is you find these sweeping things happening over the landscape of fraternities and sororities. Number one, if a student comes in, they already sign a no hazing contract, and they have to take a course and understand what hazing is, what it's not. And so you kind of get these things put in place where you eliminate the possibility for hazing. And then in the event that hazing does happen, it is no longer on the fraternity itself, it is on the individual. Number one, because you signed a contract saying that you weren't going to participate in hazing. And number two, it's on the individual who was actually committing the hazing, which is kind of so to speak, eliminating the fraternity from having some responsibility for an individual doing something that they don't have any business doing, like hazing.
Hmm.
And so, unfortunately, this is a litigious era. Everybody wants to litigate about something. And so it is important that graduate chapters, um, on-campus advisors, and leadership on campuses uh, reinforce the fact that hazing is not allowed. And I always say sometimes you got to hang one at high noon to keep the other ones from keep the other ones in line. So if somebody's doing something and hazing and doing something to hurt a child or another young person, you know, I feel for you because I understand you're a young person too, but at the same time, I don't, because you understand that this is not an acceptable behavior at this time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying all that, and I agree with you completely. I think, number one, we as alumni have to speak out on this issue and make sure that the chapters are not engaging in that behavior. And then number two, you're right. For those that do engage in it, we have to throw the book at them so that way people understand that this is just not allowed, it's not accepted. And if you do engage in that behavior, you're going to be prosecuted, but as long as the judges will throw these cases out and basically say, well, we can't do this. This kid is 18, we can't do this to this kid. I mean, unfortunately, the message is never going to sink in. And so there has to be prosecution when they're found guilty of this activity. It has to be. So I agree with you there completely. The other thing is at Arkansas Baptist College, I know that you worked as the director of disability services. So, in your mind, what are some ways that today's fraternity and sorority chapters can make their organizations more attractive, more inclusive, more accessible to those students who have disabilities?
Okay, so you asked me a question, but I have to go back to the previous number three, third question you asked me about getting a master's degree in student affairs.
Yeah.
And so I got a master's degree in student affairs because I wanted to make sure that students who were blind and visually impaired got a fair shake on college campuses, right?
Mhm.
So I had this in the beginning of my career, I had this extremely bright blind young lady who went blind from meningitis at 16. So she was extremely bright. She graduated from the School for the Blind. She went to institution of higher education in Tennessee, and they did not, she ended up failing out because they did not provide her with adequate materials in a reasonable time frame. And this young lady was smart. And so I realized at that point that I had to make a difference in the lives of individuals who had disabilities, because if I don't speak up for them, who will? So fast forward to working at Arkansas Baptist College. When I was in my um, practicum phase or student teaching phase of the master's degree, I went and one of our assignments was to be able to create a office on a college campus that did not exist. And so I was I was able to work at Arkansas Baptist College, and I created the Office of Disabilities Support Services, which was the first time that it had been created in the history of the college. So I thought to myself, well, what is happening with individuals who have disabilities if they want to attend this college? And the answer was nothing. They weren't getting anything, which is out of line with what federal guidelines say, especially when you receive federal monies. So any place that receive federal monies, they have to abide by the ADA Disability Act 1990 and ADA and the Rehab Act 1973. These things kind of shape and mold how we treat individuals in higher education or in education period, right? And so I wanted to make sure, number one, that the college was doing right by students, and number two, that the students got a fair shake uh, as it pertained to having a disability, no matter if it's physical, mental, um, perception, or, I wanted to make sure they had, um, they were getting treated correctly. And as it speaks to fraternities and sororities, how we make things more accessible. If we want to talk about accessibility, we have to talk about things that we can do most oftentimes that don't put the fraternity in a situation where it costs a lot of money. So there are some limitations to ADA. Like if a building is going to cost too much to renovate, then you can add things to it that don't make you have to spend all of the money that you need to. Some of the things that you can do, especially on a college campus, is if you're having a information session, you can have it located on the first floor of buildings. If you know, especially on HBCU, some of the buildings are older, right? And they don't have elevators. So if you have things, those information sessions on first floor, when you walk in the building, it's easily accessible. They can get to the first floor, get to the room. Normally, what I try to do is make sure that we have it in a place where it's not hard to find. And if you think about that, you put it in a place where it's not hard to find or in a building that is accessible, then you are really opening the fraternity up to get a wide range of individuals who are interested in joining the fraternity. Yeah. As it pertains to individuals with disabilities who may have mental disabilities. Fraternities and sororities currently do not allow hazing, so I believe that overall fraternities and sororities are becoming inclusive because you don't have that requirement or that thing happening where you could push somebody mentally to break, right? Or with hazing. As it pertains to fraternity houses, if you have one, and if your fraternity happens to have a fraternity house, some of the easier things to do is to create places where you have a ramp to get up, because most oftentimes fraternity houses are housed in historic districts, especially I know with HBCUs are most oftentimes fraternity houses, they are housed in historic districts, and those older homes have at least 2 or 3 stairs, sets of stairs to get into the house to even access the home. And so you can add different types of ramps. You can also designate handicap parking. I've done a lot of work with different entities here in Little Rock. One, I was on a walkability committee over at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. And so the reason being is that they were having disabled parking so far away from the building that if it was raining, the person would be soaked by the time they get to the building. Then they were having ramps that were not There were not ADA standards, like too steep to get in. So you had to kind of cut the ramp down, make it start further away, and kind of gradually get up into the building. So, you know, I did a lot of work with, when I went to Arkansas Baptist, not only did I create the Office of Disability Services, but I made the campus accessible. I made buildings accessible. I made sure that there was handicap parking. And and it's crazy because a lot of people don't ever think about it, but there are a specific number of spaces that you have to have if you have a parking lot that's so big. You know, you have to have specific amount of spaces. And as a person who does not have a disability, people in general don't think about those things. They don't think about accessibility. We don't think about um, how long it takes to do something, because it's something that we just don't think about. And so with fraternities and sororities, nowadays you do see individuals with disabilities in fraternities and sororities. And that is a good thing, because uh, I think that fraternities and sororities have to mimic the real population. It can't be some elite group of people. You have to mimic the population, right? And so it is important that fraternities and sororities begin to try to make things accessible for individuals.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, listen, your contributions are just incredible at Arkansas Baptist College and everywhere else that you go. So I love, what you're bringing to a college campus, and I love your thoughts about why it's important to have diverse students, including ones, let's say, with a physical disability, for example, and why that's important. Ultimately, I think, it makes us better to have all those different lenses as an organization. It helps us to solve problems faster. And I think it makes for a better organization. So that's all amazing. Now you're an associate professor. You're also the program coordinator for rehab of the blind at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Tell our audience, like, what are your responsibilities in this position?
So let me start by saying the field of blindness is a very small field. So when I took this position in 2015, I became the first African-American male in the history of the field of blindness to run a program at a predominantly white institution.
Mhm.
And so that within itself, well, let's talk about some of my position duties. So I am responsible for coordinating this program all the way through from the beginning to the end. I advise my students from the day one till they matriculate. And then I also assist students with getting internships and practicums. That's part of the duties. Um, um, Man, I have so many duties. I can't begin to explain them all. Of course, I teach courses. Um, and I work with constituents in the community to get students to be able to stay. They come to, so the program is mostly online. In the summer times, they come to Arkansas, and this is where they get the skills portion, the blindfold sessions. So in order to teach the blind, you have to be blind to understand how these concepts and skills work. So they spend 3 weeks under blindfold every day, and they start on the inside, which we call inside travel, and then they advance to outside travel. Um, and The outside travel is really advanced travel. You cross 4 lanes of traffic under blindfold, you travel downtown, you ride buses, you get on escalators, you ride elevators, you ascend and descend stairs. So it is a really intense 3 week session, and it happens. You have to participate in it twice, summer one and summer two. That's a requirement. And then after that, I coordinate practicums and I coordinate internships. I have about 10 affiliation agreements with VAs around the country, where I send interns to have a paid internship, so that they're just not trying to complete those 350 hours for free. So they actually get paid a VA salary. Um, my program in particular is one of the oldest programs in the country. It is one of the oldest ones that has been continuously accredited. Um, it is the first program to go online. So we have a really good program.
Man, that's amazing. I love the work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely incredible. So thank you for laying that out for our audience. I think that's just incredible work. And one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, I was wondering, how do we get more diversity among tenured professors and administrators on a college campus? I mean, you mentioned that you were the first Black person to have a program like this. I think all of this is incredibly important, especially as our college student demographics are so diverse today. So how do we make more diversity among tenured professors?
Oh, so hey, this is going to be a challenge, right?
Hmm.
So we have two things that are standing in the way, and those two things are culture versus climate. And let me explain those two. So the culture is something that is ingrained, right? It is the hardest thing to change because if something has been working for a long time, then if it's not fixed, don't break it. I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Well, climate is the easiest thing to change. If I want to change the how something is viewed, I could set into motion these things with DEIU, diversity and equity and inclusion. I could um, have all of these things, but we have to embrace those things. We just can't put those things in place. You have to embrace those things and enforce those things. As it pertains to diversity, excuse me, in higher education, we have a culture of higher education being for the elite. And when you look at the history of the United States, who were the elite? So you have to ask yourself that question. Who was higher education built for? Then you have to look at history. There's two things that happened in history. The one was women having the right to be educated and vote, and what followed women were blacks, right? So when you look at the history and how change happens in the United States, most oftentimes it will happen. Women and um, race go hand in hand. Something happens for women, normally it happens for race. Something happens for race, normally it happens for women. They kind of walk hand in hand as change agents in the United States.
Mhm.
And um, in particular, in higher education, we have to understand that we as African Americans are minorities, and that's women and Asians and whoever, we have we're behind the eight ball because we got started late because it wasn't created for us, right?
Mhm.
And so we have a hard time convincing um, the establishment that we can do the job and we can do the job effectively, right? Even though we go out and we attain these degrees from prestigious institutions, you still have to prove yourself. And that goes back to being in Ferguson. I know you asked, how did this prepare me for my um, position, right, and my responsibility?
Mhm.
Well, how does it affect um, diversity, right? So I think that everything that happened in my life, God made it happen for a reason, right? And that reason was for me to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because once you become uncomfortable with being, and once you become comfortable with being uncomfortable, then you own your space. And that is number one thing. You have to own your space, right? So it doesn't bother me to be maybe one of a few kids in the on the playground that look like me. That I'm okay with being uncomfortable because I'm very competent, right? If I learn things, if you look at my my history as far as work goes, I've always started from the bottom and worked my way to the top. If you look at my education, I started, I'm not saying that the HBCU is the bottom, but I started at the HBCU, right? Then I went to a Research 2 university and got 2 master's degrees. Then I went to top, the Research 1 institution, and got a doctorate degree, right? So what that shows you is that I can survive in any situation or environment. I've been successful in those environments. And so what you learn in all 3 of those different environments is you learn a whole set of different norms. Every place you go in life has a different set of norms, right? And so you have to be able to be um, you have to be intelligent enough to understand what the norms are. And so in order, let's get back to the question. If you we have to change how individuals view minorities, basically. Currently, I work at an institution where there is about, well, not about, there's probably 6 Black tenured faculties, right? Faculty members. And so I am in a position where I am, you know, kind of maybe a one-off sometimes in any meeting, right?
Mhm.
So like I said, I've just learned to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And and in order to do that, you have to be able to work under stress, because it's not going to be stress-free. Nothing in life is stress-free, right? And so you have to learn to work in high stress environments, and you have to be successful in high stress environments. And you have to maintain your cool in high stress environments. So I believe that my upbringing and, you know, being placed in a situation at 5 and 6 years old where I had to deal with racism and different things at an early age made my skin tough, so to speak, as my grandpa would say. You gotta have some tough skin, right? And so that made my skin tough. And so a lot of things that might bother some people and make them uncomfortable don't make me uncomfortable. That just lets me know that, hey, I got some work to do over here with this person, or with the way they viewing a certain situation.
Mm. Man, this has been great. I really appreciate all the time you spent with us today. I've learned a lot, and I know our listeners have as well. You know, the one thing about the Q Dogs is I know you know where to go in Little Rock for really good food. And I love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So the next time I'm in Little Rock, I need to know where I should be going for a great meal.
Well, I would say Macintosh. Macintosh is gonna be the spot. The best sweet potato pie I ever had besides my mother's. Um, they got good hamburgers. They got good hamburgers. They have, man, they just got good food.
Yeah.
And it's been in Little Rock as long as I've known him. When I came in 1989, the grandfather, he was running it at that time, and he made this hubcap burger, and it was so big you could share it with your friends. You go in half, and everybody have a meal and get full. And so yeah, they that's why I would say go to Macintosh. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, if they have sweet potato pie that's anything like your mom's, I'm going. I'm
Yeah,
going
man,
real
it's
fast.
good. Actually, my mother makes me bring them to St. Louis on on holidays. Bring her some pies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm going to definitely go and check that out next time I'm in town. All right. So, if our students, if they want to book you as a speaker on their college campus, because obviously you have a lot to contribute, where should they go in order to connect with you?
Oh man. So my email address is Dr. J.W. McAllister at gmail.com. Um uh I'm also on Facebook is my name, just my name, John W. McAllister. Um yeah, that's about it.
Perfect.
LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as myself as well.
Yeah.
Those different platforms.
Those are all good platforms. Definitely look him up. Dr. John W. McAllister. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him on Facebook. Reach out to him. and let him know how he can help on your college campus, because obviously there's a lot of information here. I know it's going to be especially important for fraternities and sororities as they're considering how they can make their organizations more accessible, and just college campuses in general. Obviously, he's got that body of work to show how he's made college campuses more accessible in the past and will going forward. So I appreciate all of your contributions, Dr. McAllister. I think the work that you've done is incredible. It's important, and I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. All right, to our audience, if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. McAllister, I want you to like it, and I want you to share it with other college students that you know that also need to hear Dr. McAllister's words. We hope you had fun, and we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.